Hi, I'm Micah Lindley.
And I'm Andrew Steinacher, and we're going to be talking about food in the Wolfram language. I'm Andrew Steinacher, and I'm going to be talking about food and nutrition in the Wolfram language. So we'll just jump ahead here. Let's see here. So if you've seen some of my talks previously, I've been doing food and nutrition for a couple of years on the Wolfram language and various sorts of things. My colleague Micah has been working on a couple of things with me with stuff related to that. And so I'll give you a quick overview of a blog he did, and then some new Wolfram Alpha output that we've been working on, as well as a nice way to visualize the ontology that we've created over the past couple of years, as well as an open source meal tracker that I've been working on. So if you need information on the previous talks or need some more background on how this all works, here's a lot of links that are helpful. Feel free to download the notebook. It should be available on the conference website or Pathable. And if not, you can always ask me for some of these resources afterwards if you'd like. So Micah wrote a blog post last year around Christmas time about computational gastronomy. And one of the things he did in that blog was leverage Datadrop and the Wolfram Cloud with a form function to be able to create a Christmas dinner survey. And so just with a couple lines of code, he was able to set up a survey that he could send to his family members so that they could say whether or not they were going to be able to make it and whether or not they needed dietary restrictions and that sort of thing, so that he could plan what meal he needed to make, which was a neat use of our technology to do that. Another neat thing that he looked at was European holiday foods, and so he made this neat little map where you can actually have tooltips of all of these different foods where you can see nice images, and he used dominant colors to be able to pick out the nice colors to go along with these sorts of things, with that sort of stuff. Another thing that he's helped curate is a lot of ingredient substitutions. If you were at my talk last year, you would have seen some of this stuff. So here we've got some nice visualizations of how it worked, and he was able to use some of that stuff when he was making Christmas dinner for his family. And so you can see there's some nice stuff here, and we have nice little mouse overs and things like that to go with them. And of course, we have a lot of obscure things too, some not so common substitutions as well that he's gone through and curated. So I think we have, on the scale of like 2,000 substitutions, which are pretty helpful when you're in the kitchen trying to keep track of things. Another interesting thing that we've added lately is cooking times. And he was able to use those as well. So for example, here, just by using a little bit of dominant color work, you can make a nice plot to be able to see the difference between cooking times of various different foods. So like here's broccoli rabe, for example, and corn, for example, and bacon. And so with a little bit of color changes, you can actually get these cooking times visualized pretty easily. So moving on from Micah's blog, we can talk about the new Wolfram Alpha output that I've been working on. And so in the current and previous versions of Wolfram Alpha's output for foods, we've added about 10 times as many foods. If you've been to my talks last year, you've seen that we've added quite a few of these. So now we're almost at about 150,000 foods, which is dramatically larger than the previous system that way. And one of the things that we've done with this new output is that we've made it a little more visually appealing. The previous one has a lot of tables involved, and although tables are useful, they're not exactly the most visually appealing sorts of things. And so in order to convert some of those things into visualizations, it makes it easier to digest the information that's there. For example, including compass plots, bar charts, and pie charts as well. One of the neat things that we've added is nutrition labels. For the nutrition labels, we've added ranges. So with the click of a button, you can actually see the ranges that are present. Normally, of course, on packages, you don't see ranges on the nutrition labels. And I think by law, they don't really like it when you do that. But it is really handy information to see when you actually look into it that way. And if you've seen my talks before, I've talked a lot about using compass plots to quickly visualize lots and lots of data. We also have that available on the website too. And with this pull-down menu, you can actually select different nutrient groups and see everything that way, and you can add and remove things from there sort of interactively to see things that way. And comparisons are nice in tables, but sometimes it's nice to see visually. So we've also added this nutrition distribution pod, which allows for seeing the food that you have in question. Like here I've punched in saltine crackers and refried beans, and so you can see the distributions for those specific foods, but you can also see them in comparison to similar food types, as well as all food groups. So you can actually see how they fit in comparatively to each other or by themselves, and then also with the individual food types that are similar. So for example, here you can see that in terms of carbohydrates, actually, saltine crackers are actually much higher than most of the other ones that have that food type as well. Going a little further, like I've said, we still have some tables. We didn't get rid of all of them. So for example, we have one for caloric equivalent times, or basically how long it takes to burn off the calories or fat of a given food. So here I've got one for Big Mac, so you can see that it takes on the scale of 7 hours to sleep it off, or you could just go swimming for like a half hour instead if you were doing some vigorous swimming and that sort of thing as well. So in the first version, it'll be a little bit limited to those sorts of things, and it covers most of the pods that we had in the previous one. But if you've seen my talks before, a lot of data that we have that wasn't in the previous one includes packaged food ingredients, and so we're working on getting that set up quickly too. So hopefully, immediately after the next release, the next thing that we'll hopefully get is packaged food ingredients available as an example here with some of these, as you can see. Going a little further with that, you can also see dietary restrictions, and so we can give a lot of detailed information on how that's broken down in a nice, easy to digest visualization, so you can actually see what's happening there fairly easily. So we have a lot of information in this new ontology, and so kind of visualizing it and keeping track of it's kind of hard to do. So in order to do it a little more easily, what we can do is create a graph out of it. So I made a website that actually shows this ontology graph fairly easily just by going through some of the stuff. So if you want to go to this URL, you can. There's a nice little website that kind of describes everything and shows it in better detail. On the website, there's larger images and that sort of thing. And be sure to go downstairs. We have a printout of it that's nice and big, so you can take a look at things that way as well. And there's also larger images and that sort of thing on the website as well. If you're interested in it, I can talk a little bit about that. The way I created it was I more or less used entity value open close, which gives all the different types, and then I just yanked out the ones that have food in the name. And from there, I just use entity property class to be able to pull out specific metadata for all of the properties. And so they all have labels, output types, definitions, units, and physical quantities, and that sort of thing. And from that information, you can connect the things using some processing stuff. But more or less, in a nutshell, what you can do is you connect, you go through all the properties, and basically for every type, there's a property, and the property has an output type. And the output type either points to another entity type or a basic data type, like a number or an association or something like that. And you can create a graph kind of like this. But when you actually do it, it's awfully messy, and in order to clean it up a little bit, you can get rid of a few things and kind of simplify it a bit more, and you end up with a structure more like this. The details are in the notebooks if you're interested in seeing those. And from there, really all you have to do is just define some useful node groups, pass it into a community graph plot, add some colors, some minor styling type tweaks, and then before you know it, you've got a really nice looking graph of the ontology. And so from there, hosting it onto a website is actually fairly straightforward. The amount of code is actually pretty small. I think it's something on the scale of like 150 lines of code or something like that for the website itself. The notebooks on how to create the thing are actually a little bit more intense than that, but the website itself is fairly straightforward. And here I've got a Git repository on GitHub if anyone's interested in seeing how to do it and that sort of thing. And another thing that I've worked on, I think last year we had a few people that were really interested in seeing like a meal tracking sort of application. And so they asked how to do it and that sort of thing. And so I tried to give some advice on how to do it. And it turns out it's a little complicated. So I went through and figured out how to do it and created an open source meal tracker that's easy to deploy, should be straightforward, and it's open and accessible for anyone to edit and that sort of thing as well. So this is just a link to the GitHub page. There's instructions on there. I'd be more than happy to talk to anybody interested in actually deploying it for themselves and also editing the stuff. But I'll quickly go over some of the features it has. If you've been to my talks in the past, we've added a lot of features, including natural language input, UPC lookups, barcode scanning and that sort of stuff. The website leverages all of these technologies so that it makes it really easy to add foods relatively painlessly. So you can just enter a food name, and then it'll go find that food using interpreter, and then you can look up serving sizes for it. With the click of a button, you can add all of that stuff. Same with entering codes for UPCs or PLUs, or even just scanning barcode. You can look all that stuff up fairly straightforward. And once you do that, since it's tied into our food ontology, you can actually pull out all of the nutrition information there. And if it's slightly different for your specific food, you can change that. And you can also manually edit the thing if you have a food that we don't have or something like that. And from there, you can create meals just by grouping these foods together and setting meal types for them as well. And then once you've done that, you can actually set up serving sizes for them, which is really handy and useful that way to be able to specify it more precisely. And then once you've added all those foods, it's fairly straightforward. All you have to do is select a food from a drop-down, select a meal from a drop-down menu, change the servings if you need and the time and that sort of thing, and hit a button, and then it will log it. And if you need to change anything for the one instance where you use, a little more of one ingredient than another, you can change that right there on the spot. And so with that, you can actually view the history in various ways, including, radar plots, which are similar to the compass plots. They're just a more open source version, since we can't really do that otherwise. And a nice time series, so you can actually see when you actually hit the goal and when maybe you need to stop eating for the day if you've surpassed your goal or something like that. And with that too, since it's all stored in a nice computable format, you can actually do all kinds of neat analysis and just customize it to whatever you're looking for. So for example, I just made radar plots of all of the different nutrients and for various meals that I've done and aggregated them together. So then the top row is all medians and the bottom row is all means. And then you can kind of see that, I get enough vitamin C in the morning, that sort of thing. But it's probably a little more helpful to look at it on a day basis, where you can see I definitely get enough vitamin C and protein, but I don't get very much iron. So I probably should change my diet around so I get a little more iron or something. But it's nice to at least see that kind of information and learn from it. And that way you might be able to improve your diet or something like that. There are some advanced features with this that are really handy to have. Like I hooked up the ability to set up reminders, because it's actually kind of painful if anyone's tried to log their meals when they eat. One of the most painful things is remembering to log it. And so one way to remember to do that is I've set up scheduled tasks in the cloud that will actually send you emails or text messages, and you can configure them at a certain time of day to send it to you. So as an example, I get a text message that I can click on, and that'll take me to the link where I can actually choose what food that I need to put in there, which is proven to be pretty handy. And another advanced feature that we had some people talk about before was having meal recommendations. And these meal recommendations can be done just by doing a fairly simple, I guess if you really know what's going on, linear programming work. And so I'm not an expert on linear programming, but Michael Trott and Dan McDonald helped me write some code that does it pretty well, actually. And it's open source, so you can see how it works, you can tweak it, you can improve it and that sort of thing too. But the idea is you can select the meal types that you're interested in, you can select the nutrients that you want to match to, and you can adjust a parameter if you need to based on how well it fits and that sort of thing. And then it'll produce some suggestions for you. And then from there, you can keep hitting the button, and there's a little bit of randomness to it, so it'll help you pick a decent one if you don't like those choices that it gives you. From there, there's some nice buttons on there. There's a log button that you can click on, and it'll double check with you. It'll make a little window come up in the browser and check that that is indeed what you want to do. And with the click of a button, it'll actually log it straight away to your history and that sort of thing for the given amount. And if you don't like the amount that's there, you can just hit the edit button, and it'll open in a new tab and give you the ability to change the amount that you're going to log for that, which is pretty handy. So that way you can still customize it even if it is just automated in that way. And so to talk a little bit about the implementation details real quick, the history side of it is all based on data drop. And so here's some nice useful information. If you haven't used data drop, it's actually a really neat, handy tool to be able to log all kinds of information. I've got an example here where I use it to log the gas mileage in my car. So I just punch the information in with a simple web form. And the back end, I use a Wolfram language entity store, which allows me to extend the entity types that are already available in the language. So like the food and food type entities that I've talked about in my previous talks are all still, a lot of the properties and that sort of thing are still available. And so I use an entity store for the foods and the meals in my stuff to be able to extend them and still leverage the same amount of stuff there without too much trouble. If you're interested, there's a nice talk that Tony gave in 2016 that explains that in better detail. And of course, there's always the documentation for it as well. And with that, I guess I will stop there and I guess open it up for questions. Thank you.